We're joined this morning by Joel Sears, president of the York County Taxpayers Council. And Joel, I know one of the things that's coming up right now, the governor obviously putting down his budget, and you wanted to talk a little bit this morning about a meeting the governor had with the CEO of WSBA, Nathan Maines, and some interesting mischaracterizations that you found regarding charter schools in that budget. Tell us a little bit about it. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary. Yeah, I think it's interesting. This was a rather informal interview. It was conducted, I think, in the offices of WSBA, and I'm not sure that there were that many people watching. It was a webcast. People watched it live, and then it went on into their archive, and I took a look at it on a link so I could back up and make sure I was listening to what I really thought I heard so I could check it out. And I guess I would put the whole thing under the heading of intellectual laziness. I don't think the governor was actually aware that people would look at this thing and maybe pull it apart a little bit. And some of the mischaracterizations, which play to the prejudices that most of us have built up over the years relative to charter schools, were on full display in this interview. The first thing that comes to mind is that the charter school law, which dates back to the mid-'90s, really does need to be overhauled. There is no question about that. You and I have talked several times about the inequities in the way payments are calculated and made. A quick example, and this kind of relates to something the governor said as well. He was bringing to mind the charter school downtown in York, the York Academy Regional Charter School. And in the context of how his wife helped to found that system, this was under the heading of school choice. Mm-hmm. And it was, I think, to show that he was really not an opponent of school choice. But this is how he characterized it. He said that districts couldn't afford it on their own, so they banded together to come up with a really good school. Now, there was absolutely no question of affordability. That's not even allowed in Pennsylvania. You cannot take cost into account.
Right.
Are you aware of that?
No, I was not.
When a charter school application is considered by either the chartering district or the state, in the case of the chartering district turns it down, cost is not a factor. It only has to do with the uniqueness of the educational approach, and that's it. And the reason for that is because the payments are made based on the home district cost. It has nothing to do with what the charter school thinks it's going to spend to educate kids. So that was a mischaracterization, to say the least. And then they banded together to come up with a really good school. Well, they didn't band together at all. This was an experiment that was an outgrowth of the Rusk Report from the mid-'90s. Mm-hmm. And it had to do with the benefits or the perceived benefits of regionalization in reducing the concentration of poverty in a school system. Well, the way we operate in Pennsylvania, we can't just arbitrarily erase district lines. You know that.
Absolutely.
So a regional charter school is, at least in theory, a way to try to do that so that you can attract kids from a number of socioeconomic strata, get them in the same classroom, and see if the experiment pays off. So it was a complete mischaracterization of the IB charter school. It's really not a very good school. It's better than the city schools, but when we've looked at academic performance as the kids matriculate from 3rd through 8th grade, which is the only places where we actually test them, we see a fall off that's stunning. It is absolutely stunning. So for anybody to say that this thing has worked out really well, we have a different definition of what's really good.
So the final question here, in about a minute to go, is there a place for charter schools? The governor obviously doesn't like them. He's talking about putting a flat rate down. We'll get into that in another show. But at the end of all of this, what happens to charter schools? I mean, how do we make them really beneficial here in the state of Pennsylvania? I mean, there are some out there that are doing quite well. There are others that are not. What do we take away from this information this morning?
Gary, I think what we take away from this is that we, the people, really need to pay more attention. We need to do the digging and not take for granted that what our public officials, our elected officials, heads of lobbies, other organizations who make their living defending one position or another are putting in front of us. All of the facts are there if we choose to take the time to take a look for ourselves.
I agree with you totally. And I think that, charter schools, talking about them is not sexy, and yet at the same time there are people making a lot of choices to go to charter schools and do some of the things outside the normal public education system. How do we meld that together? How do we make it good for everyone concerned? And most importantly, how do we educate our kids for a better Pennsylvania? Joel, always appreciate what you have to say on taxes, and particularly on this. We look forward to next week, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Well, you're welcome, Gary. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Joel Sears, president of the York County Taxpayers Council, here on News Talk 93.9 and 910 WSBA. Listen daily, 6 to 9, here on News Talk 93.9 and 910 WSBA.